When did serve and protect become disturb and horrify? This world is a strange one. Humans naturally trust authority figures. All it takes is a uniform and a badge. Immediately, our instincts will tell us that those people are looking out for us. But police are all people like us. They are riddled with imperfections, some more than others. So whether you're an officer of the law with a horrific experience, or you've encountered a police officer that just wasn't right, these allegedly true stories will show us that the instinct to respect those in uniform might just get us killed. Buckle up, this will be a wild ride. Plus, it's the law. But first, if you've got a story about strange creature sightings or creepy hitchhikers, be sure to send your story to us at darknessprevails.org. I might just read it in a future video. Now, I thought handcuffs were supposed to be sexy. Number 1. Speeding. Submitted by Rose. Before I begin my story, I need to give a fair warning that this is only what I remember and how I feel. These events are 100% unfabricated by anything besides perhaps my bias of these supposed events. Memory can get a little fuzzy at times. And I do hope that you'll take into consideration what I'm about to tell you. So let me start by saying that I'm not a very good driver. Yeah, sure, the whole women can't drive stereotype isn't lost on me whenever I get on the highway, but it's relevant to the story. I've been driving more or less for 5 years, ever since I was 14. I kind of went into the opposite direction of skill, where I started out pretty good for my age, but with experience I seemed to be getting worse and worse. So I found a simple solution. I moved to the city, and I tried to keep driving to a minimum. That is, until recently. Losing someone you were once close to is one of the worst feelings imaginable, especially when you hadn't really been in good contact for a few years. One day I got the call from my mom that my dad had passed. I felt my heart swell and fall into my stomach. Apparently he had been having heart complications, and they didn't want me to know about it, and finally he had just given in. "When's the funeral?" I asked my mom. "We're not sure, probably next Sunday. You're going to have to drive down for it," she informed me. After I hung up, I quickly looked over my finances to see if maybe there was a way I could afford a plane ticket. Of course, as a young adult, I wasn't very frugal, and I realized soon enough that my only option was to drive myself. With my haphazard driving, they were going to need to make room for 2 dead bodies at that funeral. About 2 days after I got the call about my dad, I requested time off for work and class, packed up my belongings, and prepared myself to set out for my parents' home. Although they didn't live too far away, only a 5-hour drive, I still felt nervous as soon as I had left the city traffic and was on the freeway. Whenever a truck would pass by, I'd feel my body tense up in fear of either him or myself screwing up. Luckily, nothing like that happened. It was getting dark already, as I had left the city at about 5 p.m. For some reason, I've always enjoyed driving at night. I don't know why, but it made me feel more secure. Maybe it's because there are less people out, or because I like the whole aesthetic of driving at night. But either way, it provided some comfort, as I quickly realized the sun was sinking down into the trees faster and faster. I turned up the music, Billy Joel no less, and I began to adjust myself into the groove of the road. Without realizing it though, I had sped up a considerable amount, and it wasn't even 20 minutes later that a police officer had turned on his lights behind me. Instantly, my hands were shaking and sweating, so I slowed down and merged over into the shoulder of the road before stopping my car completely. In the rearview mirror of my car, I saw the shadow of the officer. The sight of this man was staggering. He must have been nearly 7 feet tall, probably weighing somewhere in the 200s, approaching my car fast, hands in his pockets. Right away, I was very intimidated. I braced myself for a lecture after having gotten over his awesome stature. He tapped on my window and I rolled it down. Now that he was closer to my car, I was able to get a better look at him. His face was hard and angry, although his expression did not seem to match. He had beady little eyes and a hooked nose, and almost no eyebrows. He also had thin lips, and his head was covered in white, greasy hair. It was long and hung down around his shoulders. He must have been the bad cop. "Do you have any idea how fast you were going?" he asked, leaning against the car and pushing his face through my window so that I could smell his disgusting breath. His voice had a slight southern twang to it, something odd for being this far up north. No, sorry, it won't happen again," I sputtered, backing myself up a little bit so I didn't have to be so close to his face. "Well, how can I know that for sure?" His voice seemed to mock me, sticking through the air. I locked eyes with him. I would have to play the sympathy card. "Look, officer," I paused, looking for a name tag that didn't seem to be there. I'm just on my way to a funeral, for my dad." "Aw, well ain't that a shame," he said. "Tell you what, you come back with me to my car so I can write a ticket and we'll call it a night." My blood froze. I felt chills go down my spine. Something felt off. "Back to your car?" I asked. "Can't you just write the ticket here?" This wasn't the first time I had been pulled over for speeding, and from my personal experience, usually the police officer would write the ticket here, push it through the window, and send me off. Come to think of it, he didn't even ask me for my license or registration. "Well, I would, but I left my stuff back in the car, and I wouldn't want to backtrack all the way over here. You understand that, don't you?" He smiled this crooked, yellow-toothed smile. His eyes looked dead and seemed to be avoiding eye contact with mine. "No, I don't." My voice dropped. I felt my hand search around the side of the door for the lock. "Let's be reasonable now. Disobeying an officer is a violation of the law, miss." He paused. "I didn't ask to see your license yet, did I? My apologies. I'm a little new on the job. May I see it?" I awkwardly kept one hand searching for the lock while I turned and attempted to look like I was shuffling through my purse. My mind was swimming in panic. I did not know how to defend myself in this situation, and I certainly didn't know what to do in a situation like this. What if he was just a new officer? Maybe I was just overreacting. In one swift motion, I locked my car door the moment I handed him the ID. "Here," I said, rather loudly, hoping he would not hear the sound of the little click in my car. "Thank you." He smiled, then stared at my license for almost too long. It had been almost a minute of awkward silence before he handed it back to me with a nod. "All right then, let's head back to my car so I can write your ticket." As he was talking, he was cut off by the sound of his car honking behind us. He turned in an almost panicked state, looking back at his car. I strained my neck to look in my rearview mirror, and my heart stopped as I saw what looked like the shadow of another man, most likely a police officer, slamming his head into the horn repeatedly. I looked back at the officer beside me, who had seemingly already been looking at me. Before I gave myself time to think, my hands fiddled with the car keys as I tried to start the car again. My engine roared to life, thank God, and right before I slammed on my pedal, I felt a hand grab onto my hair and yank my head back and hard out of the window. I screamed and sped the car up, feeling his hand release his tight grip on me. As I merged back onto the road, I rolled up my windows and sped down the freeway, weaving in and out of cars in an attempt to put some space between me and that supposed police officer. After driving sporadically for about half an hour, I decided to slow down to avoid any real arrests. The rest of the drive, about 2 hours more, went by smoothly. When I got to my parents' house, I told my mom everything, and she called the police. Apparently, the man was an escaped convict from southern Georgia who had made his way up the country to escape. He was armed and dangerous. This happened only a few weeks ago. Things have been quiet, but I can't get one thing out of my head. He stared at my ID. He knows my name, what I look like, my age, even where I live. He would easily be able to find me if he wanted to. And honestly, why wouldn't he want to? I gave the police a lead to where he might be going. I haven't been able to sleep in days. I haven't even left my apartment. But sometimes at night, I swear I can hear footsteps outside of my apartment door. Heavy, angry footsteps. They never go any further than a few steps, and they never go too near my door. But I know they're there. Number 2. The Hills Have Eyes. Submitted by Southern PROBIE. In college, I was a criminal justice major, but this incident made me change my major and quit my job as a probation officer. I worked for the Juvenile Justice Department, as I said before, a probation officer, in the southern United States. As a probation officer for juveniles, you have to make frequent field visits to schools, to homes, to places of business. Most of the time, the visits were uneventful, but any time I went on a field visit, it was always a little unnerving, especially to people's houses. As a juvenile probation officer, you are not allowed to carry a weapon, and quite often you could get into some sticky situations. So we used a group text system to check in and to let our fellow officers know if we were in danger or needing assistance. Once you checked in, there was another check-in every 30 to 40 minutes. If you needed help, you would use the name Aunt May, as in Mayday. The last home visit that I went to was in a very rural area. It was a hot summer day, and it was about noonish. The area was an economically depressed area, and many of the homes were either boarded up and vacant or in a dilapidated state. I arrived at the house, honestly one of the better-looking houses in the area. I sent my check-in text to my office and knocked on the door, announcing that I was from the Juvenile Justice Department, and I flashed my badge. So if someone was looking through the window or door, they would see that I was really a police or probation officer. Even though the kid on probation was supposed to be at home, no one answered the door at first, so I walked back towards my car. As I got back to my car, I saw the front door open and an enormous man, about 6'9", my uncle's 6'6", and this guy easily towered over him, comes out onto the porch and calls out to me. He was unkempt and dirty looking, and gaunt, but muscular at the same time. My first thought was that this guy looked like a meth head. Even though I'm a man, I won't lie, this guy was physically intimidating. I sheepishly approached and said that I was from the Juvenile Justice Department, and that I was there to see such and such, showing him my badge. He waved me inside and called the child to the living room. The kid was about 14 years old. He was a slightly shorter version of this man, who must have been his dad. He must have been about 6'5" or 7", gaunt still, and muscular and dirty. So I talked to the kid, mostly small talk, asking him about what he was doing for the summer. I also inquired about any other charges or anything like that I would need to know about. These visits usually take about half an hour or so about half an hour later, I'm wrapping up the visit and getting ready to leave. Now, this is where it gets weird. So Dad is standing next to the door as I'm getting ready to leave, and he asked me if that's all. I said yes, and I said that I would be in touch to schedule an office visit within the next 3 weeks. The man then asks me, "Since you're already here, do you want to meet the rest of the family?" As I said, Dad was intimidating, but I said something to the effect of no. I had to get back to the office, or go to another home or something like that. So the man walks to the back door and calls in the rest of the family anyway. Right at this time, I get a check-in text. Just as I saw 3 other people that looked like they could be Dad's clones walk inside the house, I sent the following text. "Aunt May, I'm trying to head out to see you. Call me right back and I'll explain." I kid you not, these guys encircled me, and they all had eyes that narrowed and just glared at me. I really felt like a mouse being circled by a group of hungry cats. It was a very much predator-prey feel. Thank you God, Aunt May called me at that moment. I basically flat-footed past them saying that my aunt was calling and I had to take it, that I would be right back. I brushed past the father to let myself out of the house. I think I touched the ground twice as I ran to my car. As I left, I saw the dad standing in the doorway, and I just floored it out of there. I must have been going 70 in a residential area. I got out of there and got to the next town. I stopped at a fast food place and just tried to calm down. I must have looked bent out of shape because the manager actually came over to check on me. I composed myself, and I drove back to the Juvenile Justice Department. On the way back, I realized that I left my case notes and materials back at that house. Before I did anything, I told my boss about the incident, and he basically told me that I was blowing the whole thing out of proportion and to go back to get my materials from the house and to apologize to that family. I told him in no uncertain terms to pleasure himself rectally with those case files, because I was not going back to that place ever again. That group of men, could have killed me at any second. Surrounding me like that, it was the most obvious threat I'd ever seen. Number 3. Fake cops tried to break in. Submitted by HENDO. To begin, I'm a 20-year-old man from Alabama. At the time of this story, I was about 12 or 13. My parents own a small bus and diesel shop that they run on the same property our house is on. It's basically in our yard, but with some distance separating the business and the house. They have anywhere between 12 to 20 people working for them at any time, mostly older retired people who just get bored sitting at home. They drive school bus routes for them a couple of hours of the day. But we lived in a not-so-great part of town. I'm talking meth heads and just plain weird types of people walking the streets constantly. It's a small town and people know each other, so everyone knew that my family were big hunters. And big hunters meant lots of guns in our house, so generally we were left alone. That being said, if we were ever disturbed at home, people mostly came to the door that led into the driveway, as the door to the living room that looked out towards the road was behind a locked gate. For the most part, that door was only used by us when we went into our yard to play or to take the dogs out. One night, my dad and I, who I'll note is an older man by regular standards, were in our living room watching a movie. My mother came home from a short trip, and she prepared for bed around 11 that night. My dad shortly followed, telling me to finish the movie and get to bed. Doing as I was told, I did finish the movie, but I didn't go to bed like I was supposed to, at least not in my bedroom. I watched TV for a few minutes after the movie went off, and before I knew it, I had fallen asleep on our couch. It must have been 3 in the morning when I woke up to the sound of knocking on the door in our living room. Like I said before, this was strange, being that usually when someone did knock on our door, it was the other door they used, not the one behind the locked gate. It was even more strange because it was 3 in the morning. Who could possibly be at our house at 3 and knock on the door? They kept knocking more and more, 5 quick knocks followed by a quick pause, then 5 more fast knocks. This continued for about 3 minutes, before I moved my head to see that they had a freaking flashlight aimed through the glass on the door, pointed right at me. Then I heard 2 voices beyond the door. "Hey, come over here. Open the door." I wasn't in my right state of mind, because I got up sleepily and walked over to the door. They turned off the flashlight and started trying to talk to me. The conversation went something like this. Someone on the left said, "Open the door. We need to speak with your parents." I replied, "Who are you? What do you want?" The guy on the right, who I'll note had the creepier raspy voice, said, "We're the police. You need to let us in." What do you need exactly? I was cut off though by the guy on the right again, who seemed to be getting annoyed. "Open the door." I was taken aback by this random guy shouting at me, like opening the door for strangers in the middle of the night was something a kid should do, cops or not. I went to my parents' room and woke them up, telling them about these men outside. My mom followed me to the door while my dad got his gun out of the drawer by the bed. My mom walked up to the door and flicked on the switch of the light outside. Looking back, I should have done that too so I could have gotten a better look at them. She looked through the glass on the door and said, "Who are you telling my son to open up the door at this hour? We're the police, ma'am, open up." She replied to the man on the left, "You're not in uniform and I don't see any badges. Our badges are in the squad car in the driveway, but you need to open up now. It's an emergency." I hadn't even thought about what they were wearing. Because of my height at the time, about 5 feet, I could only see the top part of their bust. One of the men was wearing a dirty white t-shirt and a dark-colored coat. The other had on a gray hoodie. I could only barely get a look of their faces because of the lighting, but I know the guy on the right had the typical scraggly beard, and the guy on the left was wearing glasses and seemed to be clean-cut. The guy mentioning his squad car made me realize I hadn't even seen what they were driving, but I should probably find out, just in case I had to tell the police about it later. So I looked out the window in our living room to see a black, early 2000s model Chevy Tahoe. While this could be mistaken for a police car by someone, I wasn't fooled. It had no marking indicating it was a police vehicle, and the usual bright blue lights that seemed to cover the car were instead a single dim blue light. And also the guy said squad car, Yet obviously they were driving an SUV. I've always wanted to be a cop, so I knew some of the terminology, and I know you don't call a Tahoe a squad car. You also never leave your badge in the vehicle, especially on police business, and if it came down to it, you could just simply walk back to the vehicle and grab it. So I was sure by then that these people weren't real cops. They had something sinister in mind. At this point, the two guys are shouting at my mom to open the door. They were banging excessively hard on the locked glass door that was on the outside, while we were behind the thick wooden door on the inside. My mom called up for my dad, and they said that they would use force if they had to. And then they held up a double-barrel shotgun, and that's when things got scary. My mom grabbed my hand and we ran to the hallway on the other side of the living room. My dad met us in the hallway, and my mom said that they had a gun. I could hear panic in her voice like never before. It's one thing when you have a gun to protect yourself. It's another when the enemy has a gun as well. Any random shot could mean the end of my life, or my parents. I remember being scared. I felt tears form in my eyes. I looked up at my mother, asking her what was going to happen, if we were going to be okay. She squeezed me tight, and she said, of course. But I wasn't sure if I believed her. That was the most terrifying part. My dad had his 9mm pistol at the ready, aiming it at the door from the hallway, using the hallway as cover. He's former military and has experience in combat situations. My dad shouted to them, "Back away from the door and drop your weapon." And then the guy on the right said, "Open the door now, or we'll use force." My mom began to explain to my dad that they were saying they were cops, that there were only two of them. He told her to call 911 immediately. She did, and my dad let these guys know that the police, the real police, were on their way. This must have made them mad, because right after that, I heard the glass door shatter. It was so loud that I felt my heart sink into my stomach. Wrapped up in my mom's embrace, I could feel her jump the moment I did. It was at that point that I realized something. The glass door was locked, but now it was shattered and useless. But the wooden door wasn't. It only had the chain across the top, and that was not enough. I peeked around the corner curiously to get a view of the situation, and I could see one of the men putting his arm through the open part of the door, trying to get the chain unhooked. My dad kept warning him to stop, but he didn't, and my dad started to open fire. 3 loud gunshots rang out, all while my mother was still on the phone with one hand with the dispatcher and trying to hold me with the other. She told me to get there as soon as they could. They did, faster than I thought police would show up, but these guys were already gone. My dad had fired at the door and hit it twice, and he was sure that he hit the guy's arm once. He really just skimmed it, but it was enough to make it hurt. It worked, and they ran back to their Tahoe and sped off. We were lucky. We filed a police report. The cops said that they would look into it, but as we didn't have much information from it being so dark, they didn't have much to go on. The most they had was a description of the vehicle, being a black Tahoe, but this was a very popular vehicle and color around the area. But they were able to take the man's blood as evidence that was on the door, and they took pictures of the broken door itself. But they told us that more than likely they couldn't do anything with the blood. If they tested the blood, it would only bring back a person's name or ID if the person was in the system for committing a crime before, and apparently they hadn't. Luckily for us, they did keep an actual squad car around our house for the next week. But all of this, until they're caught, and maybe not even after that, it has made my family lose security in our home and in each other. There were many sleepless nights after that, and there will always be ongoing nightmares. Creepy fake cops, let's not meet again. And number 4, gruesome police encounter, submitted by Angel A. I live in the Philippines, and this happened when I was 17 years old. It was 2 a.m. when I received a call from my aunt. She said that my grandmother was rushed to the hospital and I needed to come quickly. I rushed to get on my motorcycle. When I was speeding down the highway, I saw blue and red lights flashing in the distance, so immediately I made a turn. But as I'm passing this dark portion of the highway, a flashing light and a laser was blurring my vision, so I quickly pulled the brakes. Then I saw a police officer in the dark flashing his light in my face while his rifle was pointing towards my head. At that point, I'm literally shaking. Then he yelled at me to get on the ground. Not once did he ask for my license or anything like that. He just grabbed my head and forcefully shoved me to the ground. I kept trying to tell him that I had my license with me and my motorcycle registration. I even had my complete riding gear with me. But still, he handcuffed me instead. At the very most, I had just been speeding. But why did he put me in handcuffs? I begged him to tell me what I did wrong, and he never responded, not once. My mind and heart were racing. I didn't know what he was going to do with me. He dragged me into an unmarked vehicle that looked very old and shabby. When I was sitting in the van thinking about what was going to happen to me, I heard another police vehicle pull up, with radio chatter inside of it. Apparently, they were responding to a call about something happening just a few blocks down. It is so close to where we are that we can hear someone crying and begging for help in the distance. I was already scared before, but now I was utterly terrified. I had no idea what was going down outside. I could hear what sounded like a man begging for help. In this weird old van, there was no protective cage like you would expect in a police vehicle. So I shifted around in my handcuffs, and I walked up to behind the driver's seat. That way I could see what was going on outside through the windows. I could see the man that was pleading for help. Then the man just broke down onto the ground, so the cops outside called an ambulance. Before the ambulance came, the man pointed in the direction of another person. I could see the officers raise their guns toward him, shouting commands, probably telling him to stay back. As this area was dark, one of the policemen flashed his light onto the man, and what I saw truly disturbed me. It looked to be just a teenage boy, maybe 15 years old tops. His stomach was slashed open, and there was blood spilling out onto the ground below. He cradled the wound in his arms, trying to stumble over to the police. I felt nauseated just seeing this. Finally, the ambulance arrived. They tried to save the boy's life, but I don't know if he made it. The officers searched the house that the boy was said to be slashed at. Apparently, they found a lot of drugs there. They arrested several people who apparently were all armed with knives, one of them being the man that had cut open the boy. All of this happened in front of me while I was just sitting there in the van, still shaking and terrified. Suddenly, the doors to the van opened up, and another cop shined his flashlight into my face. He saw me in handcuffs, then asked me, "What are you doing here, son?" I nervously answered him, "One of your guys pulled me over and arrested me, sir." The officer gave me a confused look, then asked me, "What's the name of this officer?" I answered him with a shaking voice, "I don't know. He caught me on the dark portion of the highway, and his light was blurring my vision. I did not see his name, but he pointed a rifle right at my head." At this, the cop looked surprised. He stated, "We don't have any officers assigned to this area." My heart sank upon hearing what the officer had said. After everything had went down, and this situation was finally on the news, I realized I was almost abducted and used as a hostage when a drug deal went bad. Someone was trying to take me and use me as a bargaining chip when they tried to escape, just in case they got caught, and who knows what they would have done to me. Getting pulled over or arrested must be scary enough. Getting caught doing something you weren't supposed to, it's a nauseating feeling. But what happens when you've done nothing wrong and you suddenly see those lights in your rearview mirror at night? When you roll down your window and never lock your door because you think it's a cop coming to your window? When the news reports air the next day covering the story of a mangled body found on the road? Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And don't forget to send us your strange creature sightings and creepy hitchhiker stories soon at darknessprevails.org. Thanks.